Hello, I'm Mike, and today I'm going to review Chapter 2 of Kotter's book, Leading Change. In the previous chapter, he introduced some of the errors that organizations make whenever they try to go through a change management process. Chapter 2, entitled Successful Change and the Force That Drives It. We're going to soon find out what that force is. I would definitely encourage you to read this book and find out what this change model process is and why it has become so popular in business. What are some of the things that we encounter when trying to go through organizational change? There's globalization of markets and competition. And Kotter writes that there's a need for perhaps restructuring, re-engineering, quality programs, mergers and acquisitions happen. Strategic change and cultural change are needed. So what do we do? Is there a method that we can follow? And Kotter suggests an 8-stage change process. He says that change, even if it's logical, will not just happen automatically. And it's not an easy thing because there's often a lot of resistance. There are many factors which are roadblocks, such as paralyzing bureaucracy, the way we do things around here. Maybe arrogant attitudes or, line management. This is what we need to get done for today, for now. We need to meet these things, these numbers. To re-engineer processes, there might be a need for resources, for the right expertise. And finally, there might be a cultural barrier. If there aren't any shared values amongst employees, the culture might say, well, let's just do what we need to do for today and leave. Let's just clock in, clock out. There's no really need to panic because there's no real sense of crisis going on, and therefore no real sense of urgency either. Kotter's 8-stage change process. I'll just read it straight, quoted from the book. The steps are establishing a sense of urgency, creating the guiding coalition, developing a vision and strategy, communicating the change vision, empowering a broad base of people to take action, generating short-term wins, consolidating gains and producing even more change, and institutionalizing new approaches in the culture. That's basically what this whole book is about, is this 8-stage change process. But it's not just about picking, let's create a sense of urgency within a certain group of people, but let's not communicate it to everyone else. Or, okay, we created a sense of urgency. People in the organization understand if we don't make these changes, we're going to be going downhill. We've got a sense of urgency. But then what? We need to have a buy-in, create a guiding coalition, for example. Those in key leadership positions, those in line management who are working day to day with those employees to make those changes. And if there's no buy-in, then even if people have a sense of urgency, there's not going to be a driving force to take those steps to move ahead. And for example, without a clear vision that people believe in, that they know they're making a difference, they're just going to do work like they always do every day, because you can't just have a little bit of urgency. Let's communicate a vision, but let's not really make sure that people are buying into it. Let's not really have any leadership behind it, but let's just try to implement this change. So what Kotter says is that there are a lot of pressures going on here. And what Kotter mentions is that these changes need to occur in a sequence, and the sequence that he mentioned in those 8 steps. Without a solid base, eventually things will begin to teeter, and that foundation for change will no longer hold, even if it takes a couple of months for things to start falling apart, or even a few years down the road. There might be some successes, but the change steps need to be followed in process. For example, an organization might get well into that first phase, creating a sense of urgency, but not really gotten to 100% or close to 100%. It's more like, oh, we have a 60%, or maybe, we'd like to idealistically think we have an 80 to 90% sense of urgency. And at the same time, the communication to employees has been very little, and on a daily basis, everything seems fine. So there's no real sense of urgency when you get down to the group of individuals who are working in those teams. So having any stages of change operating on multiple phases at the same time, that's not going to work. Oh, let's create a vision. Let's try to implement this change. Let's try to create a sense of urgency at the same time. Let's try to demand this out of certain people. Getting a 60% buy-in, getting a 50% vision created that's not really, well-rounded yet, not really well directed and simplified and clear. And that's going to cause some issues down the road. And in fact, Kotter says that if people were to try to jump from stage to stage and do a little bit of one stage and some of another, that it can actually appear to be contrived. And it doesn't create the momentum to overcome the enormously powerful inertia that exists. So each of these steps, as Kotter mentions, plays a crucial role in the overall transformation as far as he offers his change model. And by the way, Kotter was a professor at Harvard, of course, I'm sure he was a business professor. Another way that some organizations try to create change, but may not be as effective, is just gathering the data. Let's just have some analysts do some business analytics. Let's just have some strategic planning meeting. Strategic planning, business analytics, looking at the data. Okay, that's great. So we've got the numbers, we gathered the data, we've identified some options that we might go through. We're going to analyze and we're going to choose what makes the most sense in the long term. What do we need to do? What percentage do we need to make? What level of engagement do we need to have with our customers? Let's just push for that. But what's missing here? What's missing is the driving force for change. And that's what Kotter is going to mention later in this chapter, towards the end. He mentions that using this process often means that people have been taught to manage, but they've not been taught to lead. And some of the aspects of management include planning, budgeting, organizing staff, controlling, and problem solving. And a lot of people involved with this change process think it's a change management issue, when really it needs to involve leadership as well. And actually, that is the driving force behind the change, as Kotter mentions. What happens when an organization gets so large that all of a sudden things are just managed? It starts off as a startup company. There's a vision. This is what we're going to do to change the world. We're going to bring this new product and service. We're going to do things differently. And we've got all these ideas. Everybody's on a level playing field or a level organizational structure where there's a democratic exchange of ideas. And things aren't managed, but people are open to ideas. People are open to opinions. People are open to changing in a way to adapt to the environment, because they have to in order to survive and thrive as a new business. But then what happens if an organization grows to over 500 people, 5,000 people. Now you've started to hire managers who are there just to make sure those processes work, because it's no longer just the visionary leadership that's at work, but now we have to make sure the processes work within those departments. And suddenly it becomes an overmanaged, under-led corporate culture, as Kotter mentions. A few of the things that he mentions he's noticed in organizations, I'll read from here, is that the firm hires and promotes more managers, not leaders. There's more of a growing bureaucracy. And eventually these managers get promoted to leadership positions. External needs are neglected. Looking at the long-term impact of some of the ways that people are doing things in the organization is kind of neglected because we don't see that long-term impact. And managers begin to believe that they're the best at doing what they do. They only follow certain traditions, and they may even become more arrogant. So a strong and arrogant culture develops where managers do not acknowledge the value of looking at a vision and communicating that to their employees. They don't acknowledge the value of leadership and providing that leadership. Kotter had mentioned before that victory is often declared too soon by people who have been instructed now, he says, to think in terms of quarterly success. So we've met our quota for this quarter, it's a victory. We can just sit back and do things the way that we're doing. Or maybe we change things a little bit, we engage with our customers a little more. Oh, this product was a success. That's a victory. So declaring this victory too soon, thinking in terms of hours, days, weeks, we've saved this many hours, we've saved this much of a budget. Does that mean that we've succeeded in the long term? Or is it just a one-time success that may or may not have been something that's ingrained in the way we do work every day now? So it's difficult getting into a transformation process because of a lack of leadership and because of the bureaucratic way of doing things, and perhaps even arrogance, saying that I'm management, this is the way we do things. Sometimes, even if they were to try to go through a change management model, such as Kotter's 8 stages, which are not really management, but a leadership changing model, they might try to do a couple of stages here and a couple of stages there. But what the net result is almost very disappointing, as Kotter mentions. And consolidating things and try to incorporate more than one effort into a shorter period of time and effort, instead of reaching that full capacity for declaring a sense of urgency, creating a vision, of course, having a guiding coalition before that, then we're going to come into roadblocks. And a key point that Kotter mentions, that without competent management, as he writes, the transformation process can get out of control, but for most organizations, the bigger challenge is leading change. So he says that management is important, but leading change is the most important if we're going to actually make a long-term change. And many people need to be involved with these tasks. There needs to be a moderate amount of people assisting with making this change in order for it to move it forward. So finally, Kotter mentions that the driving force behind this process of change is leadership. Next, we'll explore each of these 8 stages in the process and how they can be used to implement change.